There's been a Starfield update, and some people have been heralding it as if it were the second coming of Christ. This video is not about that update. It's about something else. The proverbial elephant in the room when it comes to Bethesda. At the moment of me composing this script, the reviews on Steam regarding Starfield sit at mixed, with only 59% of the reviews being positive. And that's only if you believe that the positive reviews are actually positive, because many of them are quite mixed despite being labeled as positive, such as this one. Quote, "Wait a couple of years, buy this game and its DLC on sale. Should be worth the money by then. While I would recommend this game, I can only do so with caveats. First off, I've had fun playing it for the 500 plus hours that I have. It can be a fun game, but a better title for it would have been Starfield: Missed Opportunities, because there's so much that just feels bland or not fleshed out or simply missing that it's hard not to notice. I wasn't on the hype train before it came out, so I didn't have any expectations going in. That said, it didn't take long for me to start feeling a little blah about this game. The main quest is just a long line of fetch quests. Some of the side missions are pretty good. The shipbuilding is fun, but can be very frustrating at times because some things don't do what you want them to do. The 1,000 planets are really not worth exploring, unless you just want to be a completionist, etc. And prior to a lot of the big recent updates, very unfinished. Multiple aggravating or game-breaking bugs. I restarted 3 times because of those. That should have been fixed by day 1. Kudos for fixing most of them later. Could care less for the posing and photos, though, but whatever, okay. All that said, I did have fun playing it most of the time. Things got a little better after the recent big updates by far, but I would highly suggest that if you buy this game, wait a couple of more years for most of the bugs to get worked out when all the expansions DLC are out and when it's on sale. Don't get it for full price, as it's not worth it. By then, there should be more significant good mods out there that will add more as well." End quote. Yes, that was a positive review. Now, so-called positive reviews on Steam like this one I've just quoted are a dime a dozen, and if you counted them, the positive reviews would almost certainly drop significantly below 50%, which means, at the end of the day, not all that positive. To many fans of Bethesda games, Starfield came as a shock, and to others, it was anything but shocking. But one thing that has remained a game industry truism for as long as there have been games is that a game developer is only as good as their last game, which is to say that public perception of what was most recently released will inevitably color the glasses of anyone, no matter how impartial or objective, when it comes to that developer's next game. People end up thinking the worst of a developer. This might not even be true in terms of a development studio's actual potential or capability, but that's just how it typically shakes out. And so it is with God Howard's magnum opus Starfield, one of Bethesda's worst received games ever, and certainly worst received single-player game. This of course means that Bethesda has quite the task before them, to put it mildly, and though I'm not the first person to say this, I am fairly convinced that Elder Scrolls 6 will make it or break it for Bethesda game studios. You might argue based on what I've just said that it's because of Starfield, and yes, that's a huge part of it, make no mistake. But it isn't just that, it's the accumulation of problems that have been growing over the years, and at the same time have been ignored, and I believe there's a common thread here, a singular factor that ties in all the other factors. What is that factor? It's called Skyrim. Skyrim is now almost 13 years old, which in and of itself is nothing remarkable, as there are plenty of old games. But what is remarkable is that a 13-plus-year-old single-player game is still being played rather vigorously today and still has mods being made for it. That's certainly an achievement. But what's perhaps more incredible is that a 13-plus-year-old game has more concurrent players in any given month than a game that's not even a year old, namely Starfield. Now, Skyrim is a fun game, and I like it a lot. In fact, I have a combined total of 5,596.7 hours between Skyrim Special Edition and the original Skyrim. I say this just to prove my bona fides when it comes to the game. But there remains a question, an important one. Why was Skyrim as popular as it was? Was Skyrim a truly unique gaming experience, once in a lifetime, or was it something else? Now, Skyrim by itself does offer a fair bit. It's vast, but not so vast that you can't explore it. And this really is, to my mind, the major point of attraction. The landscape, the location of northern Tamriel, does a lot to bolster that feeling of epicness when traveling across Skyrim. And then there are the dragons and shouts, and you're of course the Dragonborn, the first time Bethesda has ever made this type of chosen one type of character in their games, and you can become a powerful vampire, or a werewolf, and for the time the perk system was very cool. And playing a Nord, if you choose to do so, just gives off epic Viking vibes. For its time, Skyrim really struck a chord, scratching a particular itch that people had. Sure, they'd played Oblivion and Morrowind and loved those, but the underlying tone of Skyrim was just something different, and it spoke to people. Now, a lot of people judge games by how many hours they've played, and it certainly is a good metric to some degree, as you wouldn't invest a lot of time into a game if you didn't like it. But it isn't the only metric. As I've said, I've played thousands of hours of Skyrim, but it isn't even in my top 3 games of all time, or even my top 10 possibly, to be perfectly honest. Skyrim is a good game, but how many people would rate it as the best game ever, or even best in particular categories? Is the story truly compelling? What about the dialogue and characters? The combat? Maybe some people would still rate it as top-notch, but the category that Skyrim seems to have performed best is in longevity, which we have to be honest about, is mostly down to mods, not Bethesda. The game's been played now for over 13 years, and will continue to be played into the future, which has led to a critical error on the part of Bethesda and God Howard. All games are products of their time and place, and Skyrim was no different. If Skyrim had been released last year or 2 years ago, it almost certainly would not have attained its cult status for a variety of reasons. But understanding and acknowledging that games are products of their time and place is essential, and this was a lesson that Bethesda did not learn. When Skyrim blew up and continued to be popular for years after its release, Bethesda was led into a trap of delusional thinking. They mistakenly began to believe that Skyrim was not just a once-in-a-lifetime fluke of a success, but was in fact predictive of and correlative with how every game they make would perform going forward. But it wasn't. It was a fluke, and something that they simply could not replicate just by making another game, be it Fallout 4 or the infamous Starfield. They got overconfident and thought that they were invincible, and this led them to believe that anything they made could achieve Skyrim-like success. Do you remember God Howard's statements about how he wanted Starfield to be played for at least 20 years? That's not going to happen now, and that's the price of hubris. All games are ultimately successes based on time, place, and the subjectivity of the experience, which always meant that Skyrim was a once-in-a-lifetime success for them, and you simply cannot build a future on a fluke. The very idea that every game Bethesda made after Skyrim was somehow going to be an eternal hit just like Skyrim is, frankly speaking, the height of delusion. And yet, based on Bethesda's rhetoric and their statements, this is exactly what they came to believe. Given this, we need to consider what we can reasonably expect for Elder Scrolls 6. So let's assume it comes out in 2029, 18 years after the release of Skyrim. Will it look different? A little bit, probably, but how much? Most AAA studios these days are using some version of Unreal Engine 5, and the gods only know how much better this will look in a couple of years when it already looks incredible. Case in point is CD Projekt Red, who gave up their own proprietary engine, the Red Engine, which worked very well for both Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, in favor of Unreal Engine 5, because they honestly thought that this would be a better way of presenting their games in the future. Now contrast that with Bethesda, who are still using the old engine, and yes, I'm aware they've improved on it and iterated on it over the years, but it still fundamentally presents as ancient when compared to the likes of Unreal's latest iterations, and will be guaranteed to do so when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out. Add to the mix that the faces of Skyrim actually look better than most of the faces in Starfield, and you quickly get the impression that Bethesda has actually regressed over the years. I just don't think the gaming world is in a position where a game that comes out in the late 2020s but looks like it came out in the early 2000s will be able to convince people of its quality, and these are just the visuals. But having said that, people value visuals to varying degrees, and having spoken of CD Projekt Red, consider by then that the next Witcher game will have likely been released, among many other games, and they're probably going to look fantastic, at least visually, and so it's not looking good for Bethesda. But hey, let's be honest, Bethesda was never really about the graphics, right? It was about getting lost in huge explorable worlds. It was about the immersion. And how well did that work out for Bethesda with Starfield, may I ask? 1,000 worlds, right? With all their wonderful and amazing loading screens. In many ways, Starfield was significantly worse in every imaginable metric compared to Skyrim. And as mentioned before, Skyrim itself is not mind-blowingly amazing. It just embodies the best of what Bethesda could offer at the time, and has endured due to mods. So, If the best they can offer is 13 years plus old, and their latest showing is mediocre at best, what does this tell us about their future? Most recently, Bethesda released an updated quote-unquote modern version of Fallout 4, and they couldn't even bother to make sure that ultra-widescreen support actually worked properly, with a massive number of complaints being voiced within a few hours of its release. Bethesda isn't getting old. They're already old, and perhaps their worst quality is their inability or unwillingness to listen to customer and fan feedback. Instead, they will quite literally tell paying customers they're wrong. They will tell you that 2 + 2 = 5, even if everyone is screaming at them that it equals 4. Given this fact, realistically, what are the chances that Bethesda is going to be able to pull off Elder Scrolls 6, given their current track record, and their blatant disregard for customer input and perception, routinely ignoring criticism, pretending the ship isn't sinking, and outright lying at times about the state of their games? Let's be honest, the next Elder Scrolls 6 is probably going to be a dumpster fire, and will signal the death knell for Bethesda. But theoretically, there's a slim chance that things could be turned around. To do this, Bethesda would have to restructure their entire company, fire people, and get fresh blood into their studio, all of which has a fat cat's chance in hell of happening, so that's probably not an option. But theoretically, it could be done. There once was a time when players could forgive the infamous Bethesda jank, but that was more than a decade ago, and given how games over the next few years will look and play, I doubt anyone will be able to look past what will probably look and play like a 25-year-old game. It's tragic on some level, but I guess just as all empires have their peak and end, so too is it with game studios. And as much as I want to look forward to Elder Scrolls 6, there's not a shred of evidence that makes logical sense to do so. Yes, Elder Scrolls 6 might be an okay game, but that's not what we're expecting. We're not expecting an okay game. We're expecting and hoping for an excellent game. All I can say in closing is woe betide him who believes in God Howard's sweet little lies going forward. We've all been fooled by him and others once too often. 16 times a year. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. Be much appreciated, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.